Okay, I call this special workshop to order. Let the records reflect that all council is in attendance, and we'll move directly to item number 1.
Call for public input regarding agendized items.
We don't take roll call.
Excuse me?
Roll call.
I just did it. We're doing roll call in a little different way.
Okay.
Go through it every time. We're just saying, noting who's in attendance, who isn't. Okay, this is item number 1, call the public regarding any agendized item. If there's anybody from the public that would like to speak, please step forward. Seeing no one, I close item number 1. Moving to item number 2.
Presentation and discussion regarding the 2011 state legislative session.
Good afternoon, Mayor Truitt, members of the council. Before I get started, I just wanted to point out that in the past 4 years and going down to the legislature and being a part of the session, I've never seen what kind of dynamics that are being played out in both chambers, in both houses, the Senate and the House. There appears to be like an attack, there's no doubt, on the cities and towns. We are on defense. In previous years, we'd have a couple of bills that we could at least speak on and support, but those are limited this year. It's like a roller coaster, but without any highs. And we just keep going down and down, and it's almost like the story of let's let Mikey try it. It's let's let the cities and towns try this when there's a hiccup or there's something else that they want to address or talk about. With that, I'm going to be just updating briefly a little bit of, and as a carryover from our last workshop that I had, and I'm going to update you on some of those anti-city bills. And one to this date of the one that we spoke of is the jobs bill has been the only one that's been signed. And that does too come with this little bit of drawbacks. With that in mind, we're going to cover the uniform local sales tax base. If you recall, that was basically trying to do away with our model city tax code. The urban revenue sharing bill, the 1220, which is basically a bill trying to cripple the way we receive our state shared revenue. Invest in Arizona, a bill designed to improve the Arizona's economy and competitiveness. The jobs bill, of course, it comes with tax reform, tax cuts, and it's promoted by policymakers to further diversify our state's economic base. A new one, revenue allocation, and you've heard of this in a different form, and I'll explain that, but it's pro-business for enterprise legislation. And finally, to round off my presentation in more discussion, hopefully, will be the impact fee, which is a bill that immensely is restructuring the impact fee system, as we're hearing. First off is our Senate Bill 1220. If you recall, that was trying to eliminate this model city tax code. And right now, as that stands, that's in limbo. Efforts are underway by the League's Executive Committee and with ATRA, the Arizona Tax Research Association, to try to come to some form of consensus with the uniformity of language with respects to the model city tax code. So stay tuned. Maybe there will be more with this to come, but this one seems to be still there, and we're hopeful that through negotiations that we'll come through something positive will come out of this as well.
Yeah, Michael, could you explain that? I don't understand when you say repeals statutes authorizing municipalities to collect sales tax. Okay, that's half our budget.
That is correct.
Okay, so how does that work? I don't understand that.
Well, we're allowed by the state to take care of, for example, food, commercial rental, residential rental, and advertising. All other tax codes, all other sales tax were not, and that's what the state's trying to take over. Right now, the state doesn't. They're not taxed on these 4 that I mentioned, but like for the bedded and hotels, that would provide that kind of a revenue stream for them as well. Nothing is consistent, and that's where the problem is. with the uniform of the language of the code itself.
So everything that's spent in Home Depot and Walmart and TGI Fridays and would go to the state? Wouldn't go to this, all of it would go to the state?
That's my understanding.
Mayor, members of council, let me jump in and kind of help clarify that point. The repeal has to do with the actual collection of the monies. In other words, right now, some cities are permitted to basically self-collect and self-report. Some provisions of this bill would take that opportunity away to the point where the state would be doing all the collections and then remit the cities the money. It wouldn't change the amount of tax, but it would change how it's administered and specifically also how it's audited.
Oh, okay.
So they take that privilege away from the city. Does that answer the question? Okay.
And finally, this bill, of course, was held in the Senate committee. It's still there. It doesn't appear to be moving at this time. But then again, we're allowing those negotiations to go on between the League Executive Committee and ATRA.
Michael, the eliminating the model city tax code, isn't that kind of basically what all cities and towns model their taxes after? Well, what's the significance of repealing the model city tax code? I guess that's my question.
Well, the significance, it's to my understanding, is that in previous years, the League of Cities has had control of this. And, you know, we've seen their websites. And what's happening now is part of the repeal would be to take away some of those rights that have been ongoing. In other words, this would go to the Department of Revenue instead of with the League of Cities.
Okay, so if they take that away from us, what does that, what, in essence, in good plain English, what's that taking away from us?
Local control.
Local control over the tax rate or what can be taxed?
What can be taxed. See, right now, a lot of cities are different in the way that happens. Every city is different. For example, you have larger cities that tax differently than the way your smaller cities tax. That just gives them that latitude to go forward and proceed in that manner. In this other case, if it's taken away, if it's reappealed, the state would have that.
They would do the collection, correct, Mike?
That's correct.
Okay, and would they hold on to that money, like the sales tax money? Would they hold on to it for a couple of months? Is that a likelihood? So it helps the state's cash flow problem. It doesn't get it to the cities.
Mayor, members of
quicker.
council, the intent of this bill doesn't have to do with the timing of the money. It has to do with really the enforcement and the administration of collecting the tax. I'm sure there would be a delay because they'd have to get it and process it, send it off to us. But that's really the same situation that we're in right now
Right.
with the 2-month delay.
Right.
It's mostly about the regulation and the administration, not hanging on to the cash for
Is
cash
there a
flow
fee
purposes.
on the part of the state for the administration of this?
There's not right now. I don't know if there's a provision in the bill for that or not.
Okay.
Michael, is there a time limit on these bills? Can they just hang for 60 days?
Councilmember Villanueva, that's a very good question, and I should have said in the beginning, to consider a bill dead, I mean, really, it's really hard. The only way that can happen is if it doesn't make it out of a committee, which is in this case what's happening here right now. The governor doesn't sign it, they go sine die, but to answer your question, no, there is no time limit. It can sit for a while and then resurface. It can appear in another bill as a striker. So everything is still moving. So to declare a bill dead, I really can't do that. I can only tell you it's in limbo or it's currently being held at this point. But until those measures are taken, a bill is active.
Thank you.
Any more questions on Senate Bill 1220? Senate Bill 1221, and this is our urban revenue sharing bill. This is, sorry.
I did have another question. I thought you were going to go down to the next point. If you could go back there, please. um, when it says would create a uniform tax base, I'm going to, based on what you said earlier, that means that all cities would have the same items that they could tax. In other words, if Phoenix has a food tax, we could have a food tax, but we don't have to have one. If Youngtown has a bed tax, we could. In other words, am I correct in that?
I'm gonna defer to Scott on that one as well.
Mayor, members of council, that is correct. What the bill really gets at is, think of it in terms of definitions. The definition of food would be defined for anybody who has a food tax. Each jurisdiction would still have the ability to decide whether they want a food tax, but if they did, it would be taxed based on the same definition. In other words, Phoenix couldn't have a definition of food that's different than Surprise. And that's what the uniform really is getting to in terms of the basis. A definition is a definition. And the points or the places where it's a little unique now has to do with food, has to do with rental property, commercial rentals, those kinds of things, where some jurisdictions now have those defined differently. And so a business may be operating the same business in 3 or 4 cities, but they're not paying a tax on the same base in those 3 or 4 cities because the definition is different in those 3 or 4 cities.
Okay, thank you.
But somehow in all this, it seems to me the state wouldn't be spending time on this unless they were going to benefit somehow. Why would they spend a lot of time uniforming a local sales tax code when they ought to be working on the state issues? So there's going to be a drop point here where they get some flow from this somehow. Is that right?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, I don't know so much of it's about money as it is about having a consistent and uniform environment throughout the entire state, so that as perhaps businesses are making decisions, one jurisdiction is not in a inferior position over another because they're treating a tax or a definition differently. And so when the state would say, you know, here's how we define, if you're a food manufacturer, for example, here's how the state taxes food manufacturing, and it doesn't matter what city you're in the state of Arizona, that's sort of the rules of the game. Each jurisdiction might have a different rate, but whether your business is going to be taxed or not is not up to the individual jurisdictions based on the definition. So I don't think it's so much about money as it is about an equal playing field across the entire state for all jurisdictions, and it makes it easier for businesses to make decisions about whether they should or shouldn't perhaps locate here and operate a business here.
But really, if they do change the definition, or at least try to flatten the definition so that it's uniform, eventually they could just flatten the rate so that there is no benefit from one community to the next, and eventually this might lead to a complete flattening of the tax, or complete restructuring of the tax system statewide to try to broaden the base of the tax.
There is absolute speculation that this is the first step of many to go to that point where you could see the definition and then the tax and the administration of it all housed in one place. Absolutely, that is some speculation.
And so taking that control, then again, like Michael said earlier, it takes away that local control piece, and then what we could be looking at is they'll decide how much we get, by the way, after they've gone through this whole exercise of flattening and making sure that everything is equalized across the state. Then they would collect, we would send them a check, they would decide how much comes back, potentially.
Potentially under this system, it could operate like that, yes. But that's not what's in this bill.
Right. It's just a precursor.
I think one of the things that we as a council for the city of Surprise have to look at is the fact that, Scott mentioned it, that's creating a level playing field, but not all cities play in the same field either. To compare Surprise to Youngtown and the needs of the different cities is is, I don't think really playing on the same, playing field. Because we're not all on the same playing field, so to put that obstacle in front of us is certainly going to be detrimental to the city, I think. Not only ours, but other cities.
On to our next bill, Senate Bill 1221, our revenue sharing bill. At the moment, again, this bill too is held in committee. If you recall, this was a bill that wanted to cap income tax at our FY09 levels. It was an excess fund to the state general fund, and we're hearing at this point that as we went through this bill, and it was pretty busy there for a while, was that it was just going to be a public relations nightmare for our legislators. When this was coming to the committee, many of our senators had received phone calls. Here in Surprise, we had our council members also make some calls out, and I think it was very effective, and it helped to stabilize this bill and let them think about what they were trying to do here. But at the moment, it's still, again, it's another bill that's been held in Senate, and I'm short of saying it's almost dead, but I can't until something else happens, or a sine die, or it just completely doesn't make it onto another committee.
Michael, the purpose of state shared revenue was to share income tax, personal income tax from the citizens of the state with the cities, is that correct? And in return, the cities would not impose an income tax?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Councilman.
And in return for that revenue sharing, the cities wouldn't impose an income tax?
That is correct.
So, it seems like they got what they wanted, now they're taking.
Well, 2009 also, if I'm reading this right, the 2009 income tax is probably the worst in the
Yes.
state's history, almost. I mean, it's in the trough of the Great Recession, right? 2009 income?
Mayor Truitt, Vice Mayor Hall, you are correct. And if you recall too, our state shared revenue is a lag, 2-year lag by the time it comes here to our city. They looked at this year knowing full well that it was a down year for us. So that was another advantage there. In addition to that, part of the argument that we shared with our Senator Bungard, was that, Surprise would be a recipient of some census numbers that are to be released here very shortly, and that too would affect us as well. In all, I think our Senator heard us well, very well, to help us stop this bill as it is in its current language. This is the GPIC bill, Senate Bill 1401, Invest in Arizona, and this is also another bill that augments our jobs bill. This is a bill advocated for the public and the private members of GPIC. The program includes a benefit for new quality job creation and the ability to reduce property tax on new investment for a limited amount of time. Essentially, for GPAC, in order to retain, expand, and attract businesses, most important to our communities, those in the export industries. So, this was a bill as well that was going hand in hand with our jobs bill that I'll be explaining here in a little bit, and it seems to be very favorable. It's made it out of both committees at this time, and I think it's strongly supported as I stand up to it here with you this evening. And the biggest bill of them all, our jobs bill, promoted by our governor, and contains numerous business taxes aimed at attracting more businesses in Arizona. It is estimated that this, unfortunately, it is estimated that this will take up about $538 million from state coffers. And this is according to JBLC. And although, you know, it is that, I mean, that would run us in a deficit, members of support of the bill are saying that the new jobs will make up for the loss. Then on the other hand, you have others that are saying that the bill could further deplete our coffers as the state deals with our structural deficit. And there's no guarantee that these jobs will materialize. So those were the real big concerns of this job bill. It did go through, though. The governor did sign this bill, and there are some reasons why that she felt that it could be overcome. One was the state was in need of a marketing campaign, and to do that, she developed this new Commerce Authority. They dismantled the Arizona Commerce Department, and she just felt that the partners in the state and the private sector for job creation could be an added tool.
Does this give us a comparative advantage, Mike?
Excuse me?
Does this give us a comparative advantage?
I would say it does. It gives us some tools to do something differently than what we haven't been doing in the past. Absolutely.
There was some dollars involved, some set-asides, wasn't there? Like millions of dollars.
Talking
to help.
25 to 30 million?
Yeah,
Yes.
for incentives.
That's correct.
To bring companies that are not located in Arizona presently, to have them locate here now.
That is correct.
Now, is that just an annual $25 million?
That is an annual.
Okay, and is that, do we have anybody sitting on that, on the new Commerce Department, whatever it's called? We don't have anybody from Surprise sitting on that committee.
Very true, Councilmember Alton. No, we don't. That board is a 17 new member board, and that's consists of a lot of your private sector players, such as the Jerry Colangelos of the world, that are involved with that board.
So we really are not. We're not assured that we're going to get any piece of the action that comes through the new Commerce Department.
I think that's a tough question. I think that anything that comes to our state, council member, it would be a benefit. You know, to say that Surprise won't be a recipient, I can't say that.
And actually, Mr. Cardin from the Arizona Commerce Authority was here in Surprise as part of the joint statement that was made with Castamp, GPEC, the governor's office, and of course the Arizona Commerce Authority. So, I think it's fair to believe that this is a program that's intended to help the entire state, and as a result, all of us will benefit, particularly communities like Surprise that are so well positioned for economic development and opportunities that lie within our community.
Yeah, I think it's a good. I think Rich brings up a good point, though. I think it wouldn't hurt for us to weigh in somehow in the Commerce Authority meetings. Find out when their meetings are. Maybe a couple of us could go down there and just.
If I may, today at the MAG Economic Development Committee, Mr. Colangelo presented to the Economic Development Committee, and we have committed as an Economic Development Committee on behalf of the MAG region as well as the authority to partner, and that there is a very strong commitment to look at the resurgence of the Canamex proposal, which would look at the I-11, looking at businesses from Mexico. We had a presentation today from the Consul of Canada, and next month there will be a presentation from Mexico. And so we're looking at bringing in businesses and getting very, very involved in bringing in businesses that to try to increase the trade between Canada, Mexico, and Arizona. Good. And so we are weighing in from a MAG economic development position with the Economic Development Authority.
On the third bullet up there, we have gradually reduces the corporate income tax rate by nearly 2 percentage points. Currently, we're around 7% on our corporate income tax, and there was a feeling that we needed to reduce this rate to be competitive. And so we Although the corporate income tax, it will add some impact to our city. It's probably one of the most tax reforms listed on this jobs bill that will have a major effect to cities and towns. Versus property tax owners, it'll be a slight increase. So, I mean, there are some restrictions, not so much restrictions, but there will be some effect here to our cities with the tax reforms that have been implemented in this bill as well. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. And those numbers aren't out yet as far as the effect yet at this point. And I was assured that probably be happening into March, early April, that we could probably see some numbers how that would affect our cities. Couple more. The job bill increases the homeowners' rebates to offset any anticipated rise in residential property. It increases the tax exemption for business equipment. In all, I mean, there are many pros and cons to this bill, and as from an impact from the city, I think we just have to take a look at the corporate income tax and the business property tax as well, and we'll be keeping an eye on those as this goes through. House Bill 2726, the pension bill. At this time, this is not moving anywhere. The Speaker of the House, Kirk Adams, this is his bill, and as a result of the persistence of our police and fire associations, this bill is going to be held unless there are ways that we can address the COLAs and contribution rates. I don't see this moving at this point until those two items have been addressed. We have another bill, though, that is taking a look at another side of the pension area as well, and that's Senate Bill 1609, which recently resurfaced last week with Senator Yarborough's. And really, that bill only really affects the public safety personnel retirement system. I want to add, though, that and not only the league, but many of the cities realize that there needs to be some form of effort and reform to try to take a look at this unsustainable pension programs that we have. And right now, there's just not a proposal in place that can actually provide some kind of merit. I mean, there's a lot of legal and constitutional issues when you're dealing with pension programs. And therefore, I think this bill at this time, I just don't see it moving as quick as they wanted to. And if you recall, this was another public relations issue that was initiated with many of our Arizona Republic series of information, the public perception. So there's many things playing on these pension bills. Will we see something? That remains to be seen. They'd like to. But again, I don't know if they're going to be able to proceed with the limitations legally. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. But at this point, the COLAs and contribution rates appear to be the hiccup for any of this to move forward. The Revenue Allocation Authority, Senate Bill 1371. It's pro-business, free enterprise legislation. I guess you could say this is another form of TIF. But what is being the selling point here is they're trying to pull us away from utilizing the word TIF. That's a soured note with our legislators. And as what happened with a few of the TIF projects that happened here in our city, one in particular, Rio Nuevo, out in the southern Tucson area, and how that just really soured our legislators on how that should have worked. There are two other TIFs in Maricopa County, one in Phoenix and one in Glendale. They seem to be surviving. They seem to be making it through, but there's just a lot of ifs involved with the terminology of TIF. So they're trying to sell this bill as a revenue allocation. Has no negative physical impact to the state or local governments. And it entirely is different part of the statute, since there is no taxing authority or ability to assess or otherwise adjust property or sales taxes. This bill is also tightly been measured. It's been pulled. I mean, any way you can think of, so that they could provide it and present it in a way that a TIF is not. And the success of the reallocation fund projects rise and fall entirely on a bond market. No public money is at risk. The bill, the mechanism are in place to create job and economic renewal and provides companies with something that is very hard to come by in this kind of economy. Access to capital builds projects and creates jobs. This is currently being held in committee. It did make it out of the first, but in the essence of time, I'm not sure that Senator Antonori is able to move this forward. So they're hoping to go through the House side and see if they can pick this up. I think there's still some cleanup that needs to be done with this revenue allocation bill. Whether that makes that out, I'm not sure. Nothing really has been a benefit for cities and towns at this point. I don't know if they're going to want to hand this to a city for a new economic development tool at the current rate that things are going.
Michael, is there limitations on what you can use the RAW for? I mean, is it just strictly infrastructure? I mean, at one time they were talking about tiffing sports facilities. Is this strictly for infrastructure as it's currently constructed?
Very true, Councilwoman Wolcott. Yes, it includes, and it not only sports facilities, it includes other infrastructure, and not only is it limited to Maricopa County, it involves the whole state, and that's my understanding.
Does it require each community to actually establish a authority or a specific economic development area in a community before you can utilize the RAW?
That is correct.
So it's really a TIF bill. It looks like a TIF. It smells like a TIF. It's a TIF. And I don't understand, honestly. I don't understand the resistance of the legislature because we're the only state in the union that does not have this tool in its toolbox to help communities build infrastructure. And it seems to me like it's a good effort. But I don't know why we're trying to hide behind the name RAW, because it really is a TIF, is it not? Or I don't want to put you on the spot. I think it's a TIF. It certainly seems like it. But I don't understand what the reservation is from the legislature. Have you been able to pick up on why it is that they don't want this? It's got to be more than just what's happened down in Tucson.
Outside of what I've mentioned, Councilwoman Wolcott, that's what I have at this time.
Okay.
Lastly, our impact fee bill, which is not only supported by our home builders and legislators and the Goldwater Institute. We have an all-out, this seems to be the highlight bill right at this point, in particular even of interest for our city as well. It redefines the municipality's ability to assess development fees. This bill is a deja vu. This has been coming forward for the last 5-6 years, and the home builders are instrumental behind this. They've been wanting some of these provisions cleaned up for the last 5-6 years, and right now they're standing in a very positive position. Sponsor of the bill is President Russell Pierce. He's made it very clear he's not against impact fees. He's not, and many of the legislators that support this bill are not against impact fees. What they are against is what has happened as far as abuse with the impact fees. A common example that they use is in Mesa, for the city of Mesa, their cultural facility. They felt that they utilized a loophole to broaden the base on an impact fee, and it steamed them. Later on, Prescott would do something similar, and so this bill came back with quite a bit of support. The president just feels that this bill has just escalated out of control.
Are we on
And-
Bill 1525 now? Mark?
You
Oh,
need to
okay.
You need to move your
Move your
slide.
cursor.
You need to move the screen, yeah,
Did I move the screen?
because it's still on 1371. Yeah, there,
It's not there.
1525, there
There
you
it
go.
is.
Okay.
Is that what we're on?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Councilmember. Yes, 1525, which basically provisions development fees may be charged for costs associated with providing infrastructure improvements to a development, calculated base newly required infrastructure improvement plans, contains a list of item development fees that are prohibited from being used for and defines infrastructure improvements. This is where the issue is with the legislature, infrastructure improvements. In our current statute, there is a line before that that says necessary public service. That was the flexibility that allowed these cities to sort of broaden the language a little bit on the impact fees. So they're trying to remove this necessary public service and just put infrastructure service improvements completely. That's where this bill's headed. These were some of the provisions too that also feels, and the league has been very strong on this, is also limiting the way we utilize impact fees. And I think you've heard the executive director, Ken Strobeck, on this issue quite a bit, where basically he feels that they're doing away with the impact fees, and this is one area he's proceeding in. The other area is also development in this bill is the development of an advisory committee, and that is at the discretion of the council, of course. They would report, this committee would come and report to council, something that they brought this idea from other states that are using some forms of impact fee reforms, and this committee would monitor the projects in the infrastructure improvement plan. They would report to council as to how that's important, not important, if it's included. There's no authority in this development of this advisory committee. There's no veto power. It's merely more eyes and accountability for the council to hear another group, another set of eyes. Of course, you can imagine who belongs on this committee: your home builders, your developers, and so they're going to want some input in this committee. This is another area where...
Is the advisory committee defined in the
Pardon me?
bill? Is the advisory committee defined in the bill?
Yes, it is. Council.
And it says home builders, developers,
There's percentages, yes, that it allocates to. I think it's 40% that involves developer, home builders, those kind of entities to participate in this advisory committee.
okay.
For the interest of the city, there is an issue for us, and that's the fees that are in place before the bill's effective date that would need to come into compliance by August 1st of 2012. I think you've also read this in the paper or in the article yesterday. And this definitely could impact our city. There's no doubt. Obviously, and Scott's going to come up and talk about that effect and the numbers that were involved in that. But this also means that every city, every town would be required to conduct a new impact fee study, and the project would have to be brought into compliance by 2012. Now, this is what the league feels is unrealistic. The timing, the cost, the legal implications that are involved here. So this is really something that has got our eyes, and to really tell you the impact at this point, I can only tell you that it could be cost effective for us. What I do know for sure as well is that yesterday this went out of the Senate committee. It passed through and it's on its way to the House, but it was a real close vote, 16-13-1. And initially the home builders were very confident of this voting, And I think they had I think 22, 23 at that time. So it's an all-out push, but by not only our city, but every city in town that wants to have the use of the impact fees. And so we're optimistic that we're still able to try to kill this bill in the House. We are. We really feel that we have that going for us. It's a great. It was a good news for us. Initially, it looked very bleak, slim for us, but I think there is an opportunity for us still with this bill. And remember, with all these bills, they are proposals, with the exception of the jobs bill. It's signed, but these are proposals right at this point, and they can change from House to the Senate. It could change with the governor. I mean, so I ask you, when I make the email blast and I make the calls for your support to do like we did in Senate Bill 1220, to get a hold of our senators. It does work. It was very effective for us last week. And I see no different that it could happen again for us. With that, I will pass over the next 2 slides.
Mike, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Your last bullet on this item is the moves the state away from the principles of new growth paying for its own impact. So new growth pays for new growth, growth pays for growth. So the impact that this would have is that if building were to take place again, residential building, then it would not necessarily have to take, the improvements wouldn't necessarily have to take effect in that SPA 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. But it can be, those monies could be used all over the city.
Mayor Truitt, Councilmember Alton, that is correct. What the legislature and the home builders' intent here is obviously to make sure that we are adhering to the original intent of the impact fees. We're talking police, fire facilities, wastewater, we're talking parks, and they feel that we've just gotten away from that, and that's why they're putting in place these provisions to limit that type of participation.
You know, I have no problem with the idea of trying to get back to the original intent of the impact fees. I really don't. I think it's a good thing to try to bring it back in, make sure that you reform it so that you're not abusing the system. But I just find it ironic that that Senate Bill 1525 is moving us to where we essentially are allowing current residents to pay for future growth. Essentially, ironically, it's exactly what Surprise is facing today. We preemptively built things out of current revenue sources, from current taxpayers, from current residents, and now we're finding ourselves in a real bind trying to figure out how we pay those fees back. So essentially what the state legislature is doing is pushing everybody into the same environment that we've been operating under for quite some time. And I find it hard to believe that it's a good idea to tell the citizens of Surprise and every other city in the state, hey, don't worry, we're going to bring new growth here. You're going to pay for it up front. It's going to cost you to bring new people here who have never even thought of the city of Surprise at this stage. I think that is just it's mind-boggling to me that they would include language that would move us away from the growth pays for itself principle. And if there's anything that I object to, I think that's the piece that I object to the most. And so, you know, if we can put some sort of a statement together on behalf of our city, who's been through a lot dealing with thinking that we're operating under a growth pays principle, but that's not the way we've been operating. It seems to me if we want to be a poster child for anything, we should certainly adhere to growth pays for itself, and we need to find a way, I think, as a unified council, just to make a statement about how it's important that we support growth pays for itself. So I don't know, I'd be willing to work with all of you to try to see if we can't come up with a unified statement in objection to that particular piece. I just think it boggles my mind that they've gone that way, against that principle of growth pays.
Well, and also, if you're a home builder and the median price of a home has dropped in half.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you were building a $200,000 house, and I'm just pulling a number out. The impact fees were $15,000, and now you can't sell that house at 200 grand. So you have to build what the market demands. So you're building $100,000 houses with a $15,000 impact. You can see where they get a little crowded, so to speak, from a financial standpoint.
Vice Mayor Hall, it's funny you mentioned that, because that was really one of the issues that they had in their discussion from the home builders, and they did come out and say the average impact fees from anywhere, depending on where you live, $20,000 to $25,000 for an impact fee.
Mm-hmm.
And the Goldwater Institute added and chimed in and said, they feel that it's unfair that cities, that residents or potential individuals wanting to come into, buy into the city would have to have this and didn't have a vote. There's all kinds of their points for their arguments.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see the study. I mean, if there's a study, we're going to update our study, impact fee study, no matter what, whether it's state law or whatever, right, Scott? So it's going to be interesting to see how the rationale, how we build on that, because eventually we as a council have to say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. So
Another thing to keep in consideration is that we've got a huge housing stock, backlog of stock that paid those higher impact fees, and it's now sitting there and the value has gone down.
Right.
So, and those folks who are trying to sell their homes are stuck. So I can't see why we would support. I do support reform, but I don't think that it's a good idea to ask all the citizens of Surprise today to underwrite the cost of bringing new people who've never even thought of us yet. I just don't think that's correct.
On the next slide, I'm going to have our CFO come in and explain the potential impact should this bill go through, and as it is in its current language.
Michael, before you go away, is there anything in the legislature that they're working on, things that you buy on the internet? I mean, what does the state get? I mean, sales tax or anything of that, if I buy it over the internet?
I'm sorry, council member.
If I buy a product through the internet, I don't have to pay sales tax. Is there anything else that the state is doing to maybe counteract that?
Council member Villanueva, I know that last year there were a slew of bills that addressed the internet issue. I'm not aware of one currently right now addressing that at this time. I think their plate is full with everything else they've got going forward, but I will keep open on that and report back.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, as Michael had alluded to, we just got really 3 slides here I want to go through, and I just really actually, based on the conversation, need to go through 2 of them, and I think it goes to the point of the conversation you all were just having. I think there's 2 aspects to this bill. There's the one about changing the rules in the middle of the game, and then there's the one about, if we change it moving forward. And so to Councilwoman Walcott's point, what's up on the screen is really the exposure that the city has right now in terms of outstanding obligations that we have identified as being paid for with future impact fees under the current structure. And anytime there's legislation that might jeopardize that, this is the impact to us. So the total is $285 million, broken out between really 4 categories. Bonds, those are the NPC bonds that we've issued. The second would be the interfund loans. We've talked about that. The third and the fourth are sort of related. They're both related to development fee agreement or development agreements. One's active and one's inactive. What's the difference? Active are the ones where the developer has already met some conditions of the development agreement. In other words, they've already put infrastructure in the ground. So as a new home were to be built there, they would be entitled to reimbursement, some percentage through an impact fee. The inactive means the agreement's in place, but they haven't started building the development. But if they did, then that would trigger the payment back to them. So we have at risk about $285 million worth of either infrastructure in the ground or infrastructure that we would expect the developer to put in and we'd pay back from impact fees. And that doesn't have anything to do with the amount of money that's already been paid for with cash from impact fees, which is probably in the billions of dollars for this organization. And then I'll skip this slide. It just breaks down a lot of the detail on a fund by fund basis. But the next slide is more pertinent to our conversation, which really talks about what's the impact if they change these rules or in the future we don't have the ability to use this money to pay for things. And it breaks down quite simply into your general fund, your water fund, and your wastewater fund. So if you don't have these resources coming in to build growth-related projects, you're going to impact your tax and your fee structure in the general fund, whether that's property taxes or sales taxes, or you're going to have a consequence to your service levels. Okay, so for things like streets and parks and other non-enterprise funds, that's where that money's going to have to come from. Then you transition to the water and the sewer, which is to Councilwoman Walcott's point. If we don't have impact fees, that means the money's got to come from existing ratepayers in the form of actual rates. And same thing on the wastewater side, which has the biggest amount of debt for us based on the treatment facilities. You would have to look at wastewater rate increases. We haven't attempted to quantify those increases, but in the case of wastewater, just to put it in perspective, you're talking about a utility that only collects about $15 million a year. So if they had to generate basically 10 times that amount of money over a period of time, you're talking about substantial rate increases. And again, some of that wastewater is legally pledged to pay back these bonds that we have legal obligations to the bondholders. So as just a final point on this, to Michael's point, we've shared this information with the league. These last 3 slides, they found it to be helpful in terms of just what our story is. And I think each city has a different story, but in our case, it's important to point out, what would happen if the rules change in the middle of the game. Plus, going forward, what that not having that tool would mean, and that's not quantified at all in here, but it would be real hard to in this type of economic environment to have any kind of growth-related projects funded by the city in advance of any kind of growth, given where we already are in terms of the capacity that we're already sitting on. So with that on this issue, Michael and I are here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any further questions? Appreciate the presentation. We'll move to item number 3.
Presentation and discussion regarding the city's investment portfolio and strategies.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. If we could just take a few minutes on this item, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing with our investments. And the purpose of the presentation is really twofold. First is to bring council up to speed on the program that we've really been operating under now for a year. The monthly financial report relative to investments has been on our website for several months now. So we want to give you up to speed on what we've been doing. But the more pertinent part of this conversation relative to the budget is to kind of give you some background information that we'll refer to in a couple meetings when we start talking about bond refundings and how we fund CIP issues. And one of the decision factors for us is sort of the cost of money. So does it make more sense for us to use our own money and maybe not invest it and put it in a project, or does it make more sense to issue debt, whether it's a refunding or new issues, in terms of building new things? So in order for us to have that conversation, it made sense to try to get this information out here now, so when we refer to it, we can refer to it as opposed to trying to explain it and refer to it at the same time. So that's the 2 reasons that we're standing in front of you tonight on this issue. Let's talk a little bit about why we have an independent investment advisor. And I think this goes back to a comment that I made when I was up here a couple weeks ago talking about understanding what our strengths and our weaknesses are. And investing money under the rules and regulations in today's world is a very complicated process. And it's just something that is most cities, unless you're one of the largest cities in the country, just don't have the resources to invest the money given the rules and the regulations and the changing types of instruments that are out there. And so we have a relationship here where on a daily basis, this firm can manage our investments. They do all the background work in terms of credit analysis and monitoring. They have access to the markets and everything that's going on in the markets. They provide us monthly investment meetings in terms of what not only the market's doing, but how we're doing relative to the market. And we'll talk about a few of those benchmark points. And then for us, we also have a customized monthly reporting and full disclosure via our city's website. And as part of the information, the agenda item, we attached the most recent report, which was January of 2011. So who do we have?
Scott, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You use this company in Scottsdale?
The company was in Scottsdale, as well as a bunch of all the big cities in this state, with the exception of Phoenix, have PFM as their financial advisor. In some cases, they're the only financial advisor, and in other cases, they have only a portion of a city's portfolio.
When was the decision made to use PFM?
The second bullet there, it was back in March of 2010 after a competitive bid. So honestly, that was one of the first things
Right
I
after you
did
came on board, really.
when I got here.
Yeah.
And I think from a personal perspective, making sure that the taxpayer's money is earning a safe return is a relatively simple concept and very important. And we'll talk a little bit about where we were and where we are. But I think we've got a strong fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the taxpayer money is invested safely, yet providing some sort of yield to help defer future rate increases, fee increases, and or expenditure reductions.
Now, Scott, do you, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but is your intent to have them make a quarterly presentation to us?
No. Relative to this topic,
Why not?
Relative to the investments overall?
Yeah, why not?
My perspective there is we have a monthly report that they issue. It's a standalone report. Pieces and parts of that are included in the monthly financial report that I'll be going over with you. If it's the will of
the public doesn't get to see that. That's a report to us, which is fine. But I'm saying, don't you think it'd be worthwhile to have a summary report on a quarterly basis that the public can view?
We can do that at the will of the council. That wasn't.
It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out deal, but just kind of on a summary basis, where they make a presentation to council where people can see our investments and how they're doing.
Okay, well, and that's sort of what tonight was about, was to give you a sense of what that information would be, and if council wants to direct us to do that on some frequent basis, we can make that happen.
Scott, the contract was awarded in March 2010. Did the council did we vote on that?
No, you did not.
Why not? What I'm saying is that here we're dealing with millions of dollars, but yet you come in and you change our advisors, you change the company that we had done business with. At whose prerogative was that?
Let me clarify my response. The first was when I arrived here, we did not have under contract a professional management firm at all.
Because we had just curtailed
We had just
Wells.
been through what we've been through with Wells. When I answered no, and I'm going to have to go back and check, I honestly can't remember standing here whether City Council approved the contract as part of the process.
Who's got that authority? That's what I'm really trying to get to. Do you have the authority to switch advisors, financial advisors? Does Mark? Or does it really the ultimate say of the council?
Well, the city manager has authority to administer professional services contracts at a certain level, to which this is. We do not have any language in any investment policies that we have that explicitly state that the investment manager would be handled any different than a normal professional services contract. So that's the premise under which the award and the RFQ or the RFP process was performed and the contract was awarded. I need to double check whether council, we actually took that to council. And I cannot remember that standing here, and I don't want to give an incorrect
I mean, the
answer.
annual fee is $60,000.
Up
Could
to.
be, up to.
Up to,
And the city manager has the authority to spend 50
correct.
or under 50. So at what point does the council, I mean, we have the ultimate responsibility for the city, but yet we're not privy to these decisions. And that baffles my mind.
Well, I want to reiterate that the council has delegated the authority to certain professional management contracts to the city manager at a certain level under certain conditions. And that is what, at the end of the day, what this is a professional service. So if there's a desire to remove that from the general definition of professional services, that would be an appropriate step. But under the way that it's outlined now, that's not how it's being treated.
Yeah, I'd like to see a list of all those professional services that the city manager has the authority to go out and hire.
We can get that for you, Mr. Alton, but it comes back to the question again on what's a management decision and what's a policy decision. Why do you hire a city manager to make either policy or management decisions for you? Policy will always come to the council, but a lot of this is designated, as Scott has articulated, to the city manager's authority. So if you want to change that into a policy perspective, I have to check with our legal department.
How long has that policy been in place?
Well, actually, professional services has a different bend on it, to be honest with you, because there's a state procurement limit with respect to how high we can extend a professional services contract. I believe it's 250,000. I'm not really sure, but we can get you a list of the professional services contracts, and then we can talk about how you want to go about it.
And that whole policy. I'd like to see that whole policy that deals with that.
Okay.
I would like to weigh in a little bit on that too. Just out of curiosity, I'm not clear that we've been consistent on how we've implemented that policy, because it seems like sometimes there's been contracts that have come forward to the council and other times that they have not. And so I would just like to see more about that policy too. I'm not sure that it certainly will play into our budget discussion, I would think, if we want to change a council policy on how we move forward on professional service contracts.
Well, if I make a suggestion, and I'll work with Scott on this, is to bring it back as part of our budget process here the next two months, and talk and do a workshop basically on our policy with respect to professional services contracts, and then maybe also at that time articulate the list for you.
And it would be helpful too, also, just to know what the if it's $60,000, is that $60,000 a year or $60,000 a quarter? Just exactly what those caps are over a full year. If it's in the aggregate of $250,000, then that's a whole different item. That's a whole.
These are all good questions, and I'll work with Scott to bring you back the answers.
Thank you.
And another question, Scott, I'm sorry to take the dais over, and I hope that I will never have to do that. I mean, I don't want to do that. Anyway, my question is where's our checking account?
Which bank our checking account is with? Wells Fargo.
Okay. Now, is all the money that we received swept into some kind of a money market?
It is.
And that's at Wells as well.
Correct.
Okay. And there is an insurance requirement, right? The FDIC. I think it's now $250.
Correct.
$150,000. I would think that substantially we're well over that. What is the liquid funds that are coming out of the investments as we move investments around? Do they get some kind of a derivative, or do they get some kind of an income from moving investments from one investment to another, this PFM?
Councilman Rowland,
Like a brokerage firm would, or a consumer?
You're asking about their fee structure?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a slide here. I think if I can get to it after this one, I can answer that question in the context of clarifying what they're doing for us and how money's moving. That's 2 or 3 slides ahead of us, or ahead of where we are. So if I could just get there when I get there.
Are we conscious of the $250,000 FDIC? Are we subject to FDIC insurance?
We're conscious and subject to all that, and none of our money's at risk being over that. That's part of the reason it's being swept out.
So the money that's sweeping goes into what at Wells? Because I don't even see Wells on this.
Yeah, and that's what this presentation is about, is really what's truly under the direction, or will be under the direction of PFM. We, in our Wells account, just for perspective, we have about $5 to $10 million as it's our operating checking account. Money will move in and out of Wells from a checking account, just call it a savings account, which is fully insured. And it moves in and out of those 2 locations as we need money. And then
Fully insured meaning that it's in munis and it's in funds that are secure.
They're federally insured.
Okay.
And then from there, we get into the true investing of our excess cash that we don't use on a daily basis. That's really what PFM is doing for us. They're not involved in the 5.
We wire those funds from PFM over?
PFM has, there's an account that we send money to, that they have access to, and then they take it and turn it into an investment. So they don't have access to our money in our bank accounts. We ship to them. They don't enter into us.
Okay. And what kind of average float, what kind of float do they get on their investments? I mean, by the time that we give them the money and the time that they invest, how much is in Never Land, meaning that they're earning interest on it?
They're
and
not.
We're not.
They're not. It's the transaction's instantaneous. They're not holding the investments for us. As soon as we buy them, we hold them in a trust agreement. They're not. Let me clarify. They're not doing the investing for us. They're advising us on which investments to purchase.
Who's doing the
we execute the
investing?
transactions. So if we were to buy $5 million of a federally insured security, we are making that transaction.
We go to
directly.
the window ourselves,
Yes. Yes.
rather than have a representative company or a bank.
We put the money in a trust account where the selling entity can then take the money out of the trust account and exchange that for the securities that we've bought.
Okay.
And those securities are held in a trust account. PFM, we're not giving money to PFM and then they're going to the market. It's a simultaneous transaction, so there is no float on the money that they're advising us how to invest. So I think that's an important point to remember. They're advising us on the investments as opposed to them sort of being our brokerage firm.
Making the investments, yeah, okay.
Correct. So if on this slide, the objectives of the investment are really threefold, and they're in this order. The first is safety. Did we miss a question?
Woodard, I think was.
Yeah, I just wanted to, not so much a question, I wanted to reiterate what Councilman Alton said, and that is that this council is at the very end of everything, we're the ones responsible. We're the ones the citizens are going to look to preserve their assets, whether it be cash or buildings or roads or whatever. And if that is, if we have yielded that authority to, because of a $50,000 limit, I'd certainly like to see that looked at again, as Mr. Coronado has said we can do. But I think we need to look at it as a council, and perhaps certain professional contracts need to be looked at and need to be may need to be under the responsibility or at least authority of the council to approve. So with that said, go ahead.
Okay, and as Mark had said, we'll bring you back the procurement side of this issue at a later date. So the objectives in this order: safety, in other words, preserve the capital; liquidity, make sure you have enough for whatever operating requirements or capital requirements you might have; and then third is yield. So we're not trying to triple our money and double our money at great risk to the taxpayers. But as I alluded to earlier, we do have a responsibility, if we actively manage our money, to have a greater return than if we do not actively manage it without really any additional risk. And again, the other point that's important to remember, it's in the first dot on the second box, is what cities in the state of Arizona are allowed to invest in is strongly regulated by state statute, in terms of basically federally insured instruments, is what we're allowed to invest in. And the other philosophy is we're buying it to hold it to maturity unless we have unforeseen liquidity needs, something does happen, a declining credit market, or there is an opportunity to sell it and pick up some gain. And we'll talk about that as a recent transaction we just did. So again, as we talk about things, this is what we're trying to do. PFM is the company that does this for us, and we'll talk a little bit about their results. So the size of the portfolio that's subject to investment, this doesn't include the $5 to $10 million we have in the wells in our operating account, it's about $65 million. The amount currently managed by PFM is about $35 million. The difference of $30 million is in a nationwide CD program that's available for governments. And at various times when those CDs come due, we make decisions whether to keep them in the CD program or whether to invest them in federally backed securities.
You might want to explain that CD program. Okay, you're not investing a $5 million CD, but you're investing in a series of CDs, all insured, correct?
Correct.
All over the country.
Everything we have is insured and guaranteed by the federal government.
Okay, but it's kind of a cooperative. It's somebody that checks around and finds out what bank needs the CDs, and under the insured dollar amount is $250.
Correct.
All right, so you're investing $250 at a time through this program.
Yeah, it's a nationwide program that's available for governments, and it's
What bank do you use for that, Scott?
It's
Alliance?
Alliance Bank is the name of the bank.
How solid is Alliance Bank?
Again, the program itself, the CD program, is federally insured.
I understand that, but the money is not insured when it hits the bank to be invested. It's a period of time from when the CD gets paid back from the bank that you had done business with, comes back to Alliance, okay, to the time that it gets invested back out.
I would view that as a simultaneous transaction. If you're inferring that Alliance Bank is holding our money and it's at risk because it's outside the federally insured program, I don't share that opinion. All of that money is federally insured.
Did you use
on
Alliance?
the exchange on the in and the out?
Did you use Alliance Bank in Scottsdale?
Did not. No, we did not.
Okay.
So the annual interest earnings is about $5 million off that size of portfolio at 80 basis points, which is a little bit less than 1%. And I think the important thing as we talk about some of this information is it's all relative. So in a 3 or 4%, earning environment, you can do the math. It's 2 or 3 times what we're getting. But it's all relative in terms of the concept of making your money work as best as it can for you in whatever kind of environment. So in terms of PFM's added value to the investment incomes over just being in a state pool. Now, let me define what a state pool is. State pool is where cities can allow the state treasurer to invest their money on their behalf, and it's in basically overnight securities, so the interest rate is very, very low, especially in today's economic environment. So that would be if you're really going to do nothing in terms of active investment, your option would be to put your money with the state. So
What's that, like the Fed funds rate?
Yeah.
If that.
So just as a point of reference, and there's a graph later to show the disparity, but essentially over the first year or an annualized basis in the current economic environment, we've increased the investment earnings off that $35 million by about $400,000 a year. PFM fees, Vice Mayor Alton, here's to answer your earlier question that I deferred on. The fee calculation is basically 9 basis points of the portfolio. So that'd be 9 basis points of the 35 million. They're not paid based on the type of investment we buy and the interest rate risk. There's no commission. There's nothing like that. Whether we buy a dollar with Freddie or Fannie Mae, whatever that is, they still get the same off of what they're managing. And again, at this point, they're only managing about $35 million.
So they get
the
they
up
get-
to is assuming the $65 million portfolio. So we're not actually paying them that amount because they're basically managing half of that.
So they get 9 basis points of the CDs?
They don't, because they're not actively managing the CDs.
Okay.
They get 9 basis points on $35 million.
Okay.
So that's a little bit about the numbers. Let's talk a little bit about the performance in terms of how that 65 million is distributed into various investments. The 3 colored graphs, the green, the blue, and then the light blue, the pieces of pie on the graph on the left, those are all really what's invested as a part of the PFM process. So again, they're all federally insured instruments. And then the CDRs, that's the abbreviation for the Certificate of Deposit Program that we referred to earlier, which is where money. So over time, what you'll see is that we'll take the black slices of pie, assuming the economic decision makes sense, and we'll put it in either a green, a blue, or the light blue in terms of other securities. And then in the credit quality, as we talked about, the CDRs, the AAA, and then the U.S. securities, they're all federally insured in terms of the risk for the citizen. And we've got a note there that CDRs is not managed by PFM. In terms of how the portfolio is laddered, which means when do the various instruments come due, you can see we've got 15% or so about under 6 months. We've got about 30% 6 to 12 months, 12.5% out a year or two, and then 41% out 2 or 3 years. There's a graph in the next slide that'll help you explain why we have it laddered the way that we do, because long term, as I've alluded to several times, we don't see interest rates really moving in the next couple of 3 years. So
When
that's
you combine the yield on the Fed stuff, so to speak, and the CDs, it's a combination of about 900,000 a year. That's what we earned on 65 million.
Yeah, if you were to take the what you've got is you've got the yield here at cost of the 90 basis points. That's just what's invested with PFM. So that's the 35 million.
Right.
And then you've got another calculation off of the CDRs program, and I don't have that information in here. So if that's the math that you did, that would be the math. What we were doing here was just off the.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what. Okay.
Okay. So the benchmark, what you're looking for here is what's the duration of all of your investments if you put them together. And ours is about 1.5 years. And the benchmark that would be typical for a portfolio that's our size based on where we think the economy's going is just a little over a year and year 0.75. So we're in that range of having that ladder structured appropriately.
But Scott, this is ongoing. This is a float.
Yeah, this is just a snapshot of today, what it looks like.
Right. So, but money goes in, comes out, but these are the maturities that you're looking at in the mixture of the portfolio.
That is correct.
Okay, and you're looking at daily? I mean, if things were to change, you wouldn't have the same maturity.
Right. PFM is looking at that for us daily and would be advising us if they see that the market is moved, starting to move, or the sense it's going to move in 3 or 4 months. We'd be positioning ourselves to change the heights of each one of those bar graphs on the ladder.
Okay.
And again, that's, I think, part of the emphasis of having it professionally managed is they have that insight that we just don't have.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get at, and I don't mean to push you around, Scott, but 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, CD rates were at 2%. Okay? So in some places, like 2.25%. So now I understand they're down, but right now they're what, 0.7, 0.8? So how do we get to 0.8 as an average when we ladder over time? I don't get that. It should be higher than 0.8 to me.
Well, part of that has to do with what was our investments when the market was at 2%.
It was at Wells.
And you're inferring that we were there and we weren't. So, and I don't know the math, but that's the basic concept, is we weren't there, and this is helping us to get to an environment where...
So the Wells problem is diluted. Is that you got
I
that
don't know so
calced in?
much if it's the Wells problem. It's the difference between having an active portfolio being managed and not.
Okay. Well, that's why I think if these guys are this good, we ought to get better yield than this. You know, if they're professional managers, because 0.8 sucks.
Well, I think
I know we want safety and all the rest of it, but that's just terrible. Hell, I could do that.
Well, I think that gets to the next slide, which is again, in your when you start comparing it to the private sector, you're in a different objective standpoint, which is here it's to protect the corpus of the money. So, if you look at this slide, the black graph on the bottom is basically the pool, which is basically 13 basis points. Benchmark at a Merrill Lynch would be 27, and we're at 80 or 90. So again, I think it goes all to relativity, which is the point I've been trying to emphasize all along. Here's where rates are and where they've been since November versus January. So you can see that that's really consistent with why we've got our investments pegged in the year to 3 year range. That's the steepest part of what we call the yield curve. And then here's a forecast long-term for the optimists and the pessimists, and sort of a median, which is consistent with what I've been telling you in terms of the rates aren't going to move within the next couple, 3 years. And then here's the last point, is that they actively manage the investment portfolio. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments, council? No? Thank you for that presentation. And we'll go on to item number 4.
Presentation and discussion regarding the development of the city's comprehensive financial policies.
Mr. Mayor, if you could indulge me, I'm really not feeling that well right now, and if I could have 5 minutes just to kind of clear my head, I would appreciate that moving forward.
What you will? Would you like to hold off on this presentation until another day?